In our last few lectures, we've been looking at nerves and how nerves make up the nervous systems in our body and also how they transmit signals down their long and skinny length. Well, one problem is that nerve cells are discrete. They do not travel like the wires in your house or the wires in our computers from one point throughout the entire place all the way through. They have barriers, and that's what makes them nerves. They have a cell wall and a cell membrane. So there needs to be something that goes from one nerve to the next, and those somethings are called neurotransmitters. They are small molecules that are released from one nerve cell and bind and interact with another nerve cell. They carry the signal from one neuron to another. And the way this works is that one neuron can touch another, but not quite. They're not actually part of the same cell. Instead, there's a little space right between them. And this can actually happen for several neurons on the same neuron. They can all touch one neuron. And when one of them sends certain neurotransmitters to this neuron, it might turn on this neuron, whereas the other ones might be sending signal to say, don't turn on. So depending on the balance between the different neurons that are all touching this neuron can fire or not fire. And that's how signals get processed inside of the brain. In other words, some signals cancel each other out. The space between the neurons is where all of this happens, and it's called the synaptic cleft. There are different neurotransmitters that go into the synaptic cleft depending on what kind of nerves we're talking about. In the peripheral nervous system, there are really only two neurotransmitters. One is called acetylcholine, which is abbreviated ACH, and the other is norepinephrine, which is abbreviated NE. And because the peripheral nerves are really just like wires sending what's going on in the brain and the spine out to the extremities, they can be a lot more simple. But the brain has over 30 small molecules that have to go back and forth, and these are the kind that can sort of cancel each other out or enhance each other. Some of them that you may have heard of are dopamine, which we'll be discussing in just a moment. But an activity that would help you understand how these nerves have to talk to each other nerve to nerve is by thinking of the game Minecraft. Now, you may have played Minecraft or you may have seen people playing it. In this game, players are building lots of structures out of blocks. But they can also build circuits out of something called redstone. Now, imagine if in the game Minecraft, you only had metal bricks and insulating mortar. Okay? Would you be able to build circuits that turned on and off pistons? Well, not really, because the mortar that has to go around every brick would protect it from talking to the next brick. So how would you overcome this obstacle? How would you allow the metal bricks that are surrounded by insulation to talk to another brick? You'd have to have some sort of a signal transmit between the two bricks, some sort of a neurotransmitter, just like in neurons. So that's how you would create a system where you could talk. And if you wanted to, you could do it just like in neurons. You could have signals that tell the next brick to fire and other signals that say, no, don't fire yet. And you could set up computers like that. And that's kind of what's going on inside of our brain. Now, we talked about dopamine, and dopamine is the key factor in Parkinson's disease. Because Parkinson's is a condition where the neurons that produce dopamine die at higher rates. And everyone is looking at exactly why that happens, but there seems to be protein bundles that form, which is a bit like the problem of plaques in Alzheimer's disease. What happens when you don't have these cells that produce dopamine? Well, you can't function normally. Your brain can't function normally, and there's all kinds of different manifestations of this disease that show the symptoms that you have Parkinson's. And typically, when you show those symptoms and you've been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, the solution to the problem is to give you drugs that are just dopamine themselves or a form of dopamine, or that mimic dopamine, or that in some way protect the dopamine that you do have, the little that you still have, from being destroyed in a normal way. Now, unfortunately, these types of drugs that are adding or protecting your dopamine don't really slow down the disease. The disease is still progressing at the same rate, and those drugs are just masking the problems. And right now, there's no known cure. So anybody who has Parkinson's disease and is struggling with the symptoms is going to be very eager to hear about news of this. For example, in July in 2006, there was a small study involving only 12 patients that seemed promising to use a new drug that used to be used for leukemia. And as soon as that study came out, people flooded their doctors with requests for this drug, so much so that the National Parkinson's Foundation had to issue a statement saying, don't ask for this drug unless you are directly involved in a study. So this illustrates how important it is for there to be new research to figure out why Parkinson's does what it does and how we can stop it. And as you learn about biology, you're learning about the basics so that you can go on to perhaps do some of this research on important diseases like Parkinson's. Now, if you're going a little bit deeper, you should look at the leaf, What are neurotransmitters and why have so many different ones, which explains why our brain needs a lot more neurotransmitters than the rest of our body and how those neurotransmitters work.